Hello, welcome back to the studio. This week, a painting done in one session. Well, almost. I start off with a lovely reference photograph. We go through the process of blocking in our painting. Very important. If you don't know what blocking it is, I'll do a deep dive for you. And then we come back to some special effects. There's a few pickles, of course, but sit tight. I'll cover all of that in the tutorial. Right, let's get painting. So here's my beautiful reference photograph. I think it's a lovely dawn scene with that mist rising off the water. It's so atmospheric. But I have some challenges here. I want to try and paint this in a day, in one session. And I have the challenge of trying to get this lovely background sky in, paint some dark trees over the top without it all going muddy, and then actually being able to paint some of this sort of lovely misty effect on top again without it all going muddy. So I'm on a bit of a time crunch with this one. And I think what I'm sort of torn between doing is either I can paint the trees in some acrylic, which would dry nice and quickly, and then paint the sky over the top and then sort of do a bit of a tidy up. That's the way I've done things before, and then hope that I can get this misty effect to work. But I also want this to be quite pastel, and I want to use liquid white for that. Problem is, then everything goes misty again. So I'm betwixt and between on this one. What would you do? Yes, some brain time, I think. Let's start off by sketching this out on my canvas. And the canvas I'm using today, this is a 12 by 16, and I've painted it with a lovely buff titanium white colour. This is just a creamy off-white colour, and I want it to be that lovely warmish tone. I think that will fit in lovely with my painting. This is definitely not a cold painting, it's a warm painting. It's the reason why I chose this colour and not just using grey. Let's sketch this out. So the first thing I want to do is to set out the horizon line, sometimes called the eye line. In other words, where you see the distance for the trees and the water meeting. It's a good datum point for your painting. And if we look at the reference photograph up in the corner, you can see, well, it's just a little bit higher than halfway. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is proportion. The photograph actually shows this to be really on a canvas this size, but I don't have that size canvas, so everything's going to be crushed in a little bit. I need to trim a little bit off the end of the photograph, but you can see the horizon line is definitely above halfway. So the first thing I want to do is put down a little mark, and we know this is a 12-inch canvas, so I want to be something a bit less than 6 inches. So let's go for 6.5 inches, so there's a little bit less sky and a little bit more foreground. Now, the other thing I want to sketch on here is the tree line, of course, and it's really almost going out the corner completely there. Now, as you've heard me mention before, if you're going to paint towards a corner, we either want to come in well below the corner or go over the corner. Having things finishing on a corner, that's a bit of an awkward thing, really, isn't it? So I think I'm going to come in just under it, and I want to finish this, well, not quite on the horizon line. I want the trees to look like they disappear probably down here, about here. Again, I'll put a little pencil mark there and a little pencil mark there. The big tree in the corner here, I don't really have to worry about that, but I do have to think about this foreground area. There's a sort of a nice sort of shape coming through here. Looks like sort of frozen ground and some nice sort of things, some icy bits and pieces. How far across does that come? What do you reckon? 3/4 of the way across? Put a little mark there. Again, you can move that around. How far under the horizon line does that line start? Well, it starts about there, I'm going to guess. So again, you can see that I've sort of got a couple of references. There's also this sort of amount of water here. So I'm going to put a little mark maybe there. So already I can see very gently a little bit of a shimmer across to there. And then we've got this piece of land coming through into here. And that comes around and that goes off, and that's probably about 1/3 the way across, about 4 inches. This lovely river going through here, and this sort of frozen foreshore area. And drawing that back up into there maybe. So again, it's a lovely simple painting, and I sketched it directly onto the canvas using a pencil. Didn't take a second, but by doing this, you already see where you're going with your painting. There's an old saying, fail to plan, you plan to fail. Well, it's possible when you're painting that we don't quite get everything where it should be. The next step, take a step back. have a look at this from the other side of the room with the reference picture and make sure this looks like it's going to work. And my decision, well, I'm going to go with the tried and tested. I'm going to be using some acrylics for this bit, and I've put out on my little plastic plate here, I've got some burnt sienna, and I have some, what have I got here? Raw umber. So I put out two colours, a dark brown and a light brown. I've got a couple of old brushes. This is a synthetic liner brush, and I've got my usual bristle brush, and I've got some water. Now, I'm going to use just straightforward off the plate. I don't want this to dry quite quickly, and I'm mixing these two together. I've got a cool brown colour and I've got a warm brown colour, and I think when it reaches the skyline it can get a little bit sort of lighter and a little bit less sort of heavy. Now I've put a few little marks on here. I'm just going to, again, just very gently, just move my picture so I can see it. Again, just look at your reference and you can see there's a lot of sky seen through here. You get to about here though, and this becomes quite a solid mat of foliage, doesn't it? So again, all of these little marks, they're just little references. They're just little kind of eyeline references that your eyes can fall upon quickly. What do you think of my colour? I'll bring the reference up. Too light? I think so. I think we need something a little darker. I think I might put out a little bit of black with this colour and mix it in. See how quickly it starts to come together. I've got a little bit of the light brown coming through, a little bit of the dark brown coming through. It's not just one colour. Now then, before I get carried away with this, I need to stop, have a look at my reference picture, sit back in the chair. I think I'm in the right direction with this. What do you think? Well, I can't hear what you think, obviously, but I want to know, are you sitting there nodding along with me, or are you sitting there holding your head in your hands wondering, why am I doing it? Don't worry, if you're not sitting there with your head in your hands, sometimes I will be. Okay, and again, just building these things up slowly is the answer. I can come back and change all this if I really needed to, but I would prefer to get this sort of done to a good level rather than have to fight back over all of this and paint it all again. I think what I'm looking for here now is a few little sticks and twigs and then a little bit more foliage over the top. So that's the next step. For those background trees, I've got my liner brush and I'm going to go into this little bit of this black, dark brown colour here. A little drop of water. I always make sure that I have a few drops of dish soap in my water. Apart from anything else, it helps the sort of paint sort of distribute nicely through the bristles. And all I'm going to do here is I just want to drop in some of these little background trees. Again, paint. I tend to like to paint from the bottom up. I tend to find that I can paint up and off with a nice little flourish. I'll do a few of those little upward strokes. So you can sort of get a nice sort of tapered finish. I find if ever I start from the top down, I tend to land with a bit of a blob. Okay, I find it very hard to start gently, and invariably that happens, you end up sort of doing a fat bit. So again, just personal preference here. For those lovely sort of sticky twiggy tops to my trees, I'm going to use my brush and I'm going to just dab its side. I'm going to use the side of the brush more than I'm going to use the tips here, just into, I'm going to go into some of this fairly dry paint, don't go into that really wet paint. You'll often find that when you stand back and see trees on the horizon line that they look like they're a complete tree, but they're actually not. It's just where there are countless numbers of sticks and twigs at the very edge of the tree. They look like it's a completed tree, as though it had foliage on it, but it isn't. It's just literally where the tree is just, the shape of it is maintained by the number of sticks and twigs. Down around the centre. Right, I'll carry on adding sticks and twigs to this, and I think once I've got this done, well, I think my background's sorted, and we move on to the oils. So that's my underpainting complete. I left it to dry, and now I'm ready to start working in oils. Now I'm going to just work on the sky portion to start with. We'll come on to work on this section a bit later on. But what I'm going to start with is this, and this is some Bob Ross liquid clear oil paint. Now if you don't have this, you can use linseed oil as long as it's a liquid base, and in this case I'm using a transparent colour because, well, I want to see all of this through it. I could use liquid white, but I'm afraid it will make everything go a bit foggy, and my sort of slightly warm background here may turn a bit cool. So I'm going to opt to use something called that liquid clear, and I've put just a teeny tiny bit in this dish here, just a little bit, and I've got a very old landscape 1-inch Bob Ross landscape brush here, and literally one little dab will cover this completely. And the idea, as always, is to cover this with a very, very thin coat. Just going to go down to the waterline there, and the idea here is to put on just enough to be able to spread the colours I'm going to be using. A couple of shakes like that and you get a kind of torch, and you can just pull that up and shine it across the surface of the canvas, and I hope you can see there's a little bit of a shine coming back. You can see a little bit of a shiny look to it. That's the liquid clear. But where you go and there is sort of no shine at all, where it's a little bit flat or matte, then you know that you haven't put any liquid clear. So up there is pretty dry, but over here a little bit shiny. So that's the way to test your canvas, is to use a torch and see if you can make sure there's a little bit of a sheen or a little bit of a shine on there. But you really want to make sure there's no more than just the smallest amount, because we're going to be putting colour on top. Too much liquid clear and you add colour on top, well, it all just turns into something very runny. So we just want that thin coat. Have a quick look at that reference photograph up in the corner. You can see that I've got a bit of a blue sky up there, but it's a very pale blue-grey colour here, and it's dropping down to this lovely sort of golden colour behind the trees. So blues and yellows on the same sky. Recipe for disaster. I can hear almost saying now that you'll end up with a bright green sky, but when you look carefully on that sort of boundary between the yellows and blues, there's almost a hint of green. And if you look on some skies, you will actually see a green tone. So I'm not particularly worried if I get a touch of that happening in my painting. Now I've switched over to a little 3/4 inch brush. I've got a little touch of titanium white. I salvaged this off the palette for the last painting, so it's a little on the dry side here, and I'm literally going to scrub in the smallest amount. These trees in the reference photograph, if you look carefully, they have a little bit of a haze to them. And as you can see, I can work this titanium white colour across those trees. And look at that, you can get this sort of a bit of a haze going here. I'll put a little bit more up there in the corner. See, I'm kind of steering away from the tops of those trees, so I worked up in those top corners first. Scrub this in, but I'm going to give my brush a dry clean. I think I'm going to go into the Indian yellow. Let's be mad. Touch of Indian yellow, and I picked Indian yellow because, well, part of the fact it's a lovely warm yellow colour, it's also very transparent, which means I can go right over the edges of my trees here. I can get a lovely warm glow into my painting, and I don't lose too much of my tree line. If I use cad yellow, which is a little bit opaque, well, this has all been sort of more and more fuzzy and furred and sort of disappearing. And yellow ochre, well, it would completely obliterate everything. But here, I can let this colour kind of drift in over the top of those browns. And so looking carefully at the reference picture, you can see that by the time I get over to here, that's going to be blue from above and it's going to be more yellowish from down below. So see, I need to be stopping with the yellow colour just at that tree line there, so there's a nice band. I'll stand back, maybe add a touch of red into the mix to get a bit more of an orange glow. Time for some blue, I think. And again, I'm going to just dry clean this brush, but no, I'm not going to risk that one with my cerulean blue. That really would get me a green sky. No, I need another one of these. So there's my other 1/2 inch brush. I find these little short handled 1/2 inch brushes the perfect size for these sort of smaller canvases, 12 by 16. And if you tend to paint on smaller canvases, I think a 1/2 and a 3/4 inch brush are really the smallest brushes. You don't need anything much bigger than that. Now I'm going to load my brush with just the smallest amount of this cerulean blue colour. If it's too strong on my brush, I'll put a little more white into it. Because if you look at the reference pictures of it, there's really not a lot of blue colour in this sky. Now we're painting over this buff titanium, which has got a bit of a yellowish hint to it. So we might actually get a little bit of a greenish tone right off the bat. And I'm going to literally put this colour right at the very top of my canvas. And I'm going to just let the colour slowly drift down. And by the time I get down to just above the yellow layer, I want my brush to be running out of paint. And as I said, if I get the merest hint of green, I'm okay with that. In fact, I almost want it a little bit. I almost love that little bit of a greenish hue that comes through there. I think it's just so lovely. So this needs to now sit for a little while, and then I'm going to come back and work in a little tiny drop of colour into the foreground area in here. I want to start thinking about painting the watery areas. But so far so good. I think this is starting to look really lovely. Now, just to remind you, there is so little paint on here, almost nothing, that it means I can remove what little bit there is here and just sort of bring this background forward. So anywhere that's a little bigger and a little close to me, like here, I can just remove a tiny little bit of that misty, murky look from my painting, and that brings this section forward and lets that go backwards. And that's exactly what I've done here. I just kind of lifted off some of the misty, murky effects. And if you look at the reference photograph, you see there's lots of lights and darks in here. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm literally doing like a bit of a special effect here by just removing some paint. Paint here is almost completely as dry as I can make it, which means I can swirl that misty effect up there without getting into too much of a muddy mess. And I'm going to go back to my 1-inch brush here, and same procedure again. It's really, really thin. I'm not worried about these little bits that hung over from the acrylic. They'll just get swallowed up in the water. So again, another little thin coat on here. I need to mix up two values here, that lovely golden colour across the water there, and then we've got some sort of lavender and blue colours in here, pretty cool colours. For my brilliant colour on the water here, I'm going to be using some Indian yellow, again a little speck of red. I want a sort of a warm orangey kind of colour, and I'm going to put in some titanium white with that. I literally hold my paint up against my reference photograph here, and I kind of look to see how far off I am with it. I might put a bit of dark sienna into this mixture, but I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good average there, and this is just an easy way of testing things. That's pretty white, but there you go. That's an easy way of testing. And I want this lavender colour in here as well, maybe to the blue side, and quite cool. Cerulean blue colour, a little touch of crimson. I know these make a lavender colour, and that's nowhere near the sort of colour that I need for this water. Even if I add white into it to test my colours, I think it's still a little on the bright side. Let's test it. Take a little of this. Yeah, see that kind of colour there? It just doesn't quite go, does it? It's definitely not that colour. So this is a cooler blue colour I need here. Let's remix the colour again. Now we're heading towards the right direction here. I still think this is a little darker, but I can definitely see I'm getting closer with my colours. And again, You need to do this every time you sort of remix colours here. I think some of these pale blue colours here on the beach here are not a million miles away. I'll play around a little bit more with it, but I think I'm getting closer. And before I put any colour on here at all, I want to work in again a little touch of titanium white just to kind of brighten this up. There's a little bit of a bluish colour. I think I got some blue on my brush from somewhere, but I'm not too worried. Again, I'm putting this on here very, very thinly here. I can still just about see my layout line. Now I'm going to go back into my yellow and orange colours here with my little old brush. And I'm going to literally underpaint some of this area through here. I'm going to just scrub some colour on. I hope I don't get a green colour here, but you know, if I do, I do. That's fine. And again, look at your reference picture here. This kind of goes to around about there. You know, there's always that chance that the lavender colours and the blue colours will overwhelm this. A little bit of a care with it. And again, I'm not too worried about these little bits of dark paint that got kind of dropped down. They could be part of the reflections or the shadows or a little bit of a ripple on the water, so I'm not going to fret with that too much. The lavender colour that I made and the yellow colours, if they get together, they tend to make a sort of a brownish tobacco colour. They don't tend to go green, so we're a little bit in luck there. So I'm going to go into this colour that I made. And this again was Bob Ross Landscape Red, which is a dull earth colour, and some cerulean blue, which is quite a nice blue sky colour, but not a tropical blue colour. And I'm going to tint this down with the smallest amount of Payne's Grey. And if you don't have Payne's Grey on your palette at some time, then you are missing out. Because Payne's Grey is a lovely tint colour. It tints things down, it tones things down. I call it a chameleon colour because when you put it with another colour like this purple tone colour, it tends not to change the value, but just the sort of the intensity. You can tone things down. I don't know how best to describe that, but you can knock down a really bright colour and turn it into a much sort of less intense colour. Let's put a little bit more Payne's Grey into that. Look at that. Kind of just knocks out the brightness, the saturation. I'm not sure if these words really are the right words. I'm not a very wordy art person, I have to say. But you get what I mean. You know, you can do that and you can say, yeah, that drops it into the shade as opposed to letting it be overly bright. Here, and you can see as my brush runs out of colour, that sort of ochre yellow colour on the canvas there. As I move the paint around, you get little hints of it coming through. You get little touches, and the nice thing is that yellow colour will work with that blue colour there, and you can get some different shades and different colours coming through. Now, I'm going to bring the reference photograph up here in the corner and make sure you can see that as I'm painting, because you can see I'm always looking at my references. I'm always sort of kind of comparing what I'm doing with my reference, see if my colours match, see if I'm close with things, to see if I need to add more Payne's Grey into there to just kind of, that looks a little bright there, didn't it? I'm just going to go and tone that down. Maybe that's a little too much. Let's move that around a little bit. There you go. You kind of got that back. Now, I can know when I look on screen and I look at my palette, these colours are not the same. Okay, I've mentioned this before on previous paintings that the camera does not see a true colour. Okay, it just doesn't. It does not see the same colours that I see in real life. And I'm painting from the reference photograph, which again looks different sometimes. The way you see it on screen, it's just one of those things we have to work with cameras when we're trying to paint, that sometimes what I'm doing doesn't always look exactly the same as what you see, and I try and get the best average to make it work as a for the camera, for the video, so that you can get an idea what I'm doing actually sort of kind of matches up. So I put a little dark sienna up there beside my Indian yellow. I pulled some of that across with some white. And see what it does, it kind of changes the value. It goes from being that kind of light, sort of almost transparent orangey kind of colour. Suddenly it looks a little bit more dense. There's a little bit more to it. It's not quite so thin. And when I put that on my canvas, you can see that it has a stronger value. It's not got that same sort of slightly washed out appearance to it. It's got a little bit more kind of body to it. It's a little bit sort of heavier. So that way I can paint this on here, and it actually really kind of sticks well to the canvas in terms of the colours, and they don't get pushed around so easily by the blues and the purples. I'm going to put a little bit of that up there. So you saw that last little section there, how I talked about the blocking in process of my painting, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into that subject because I feel this is probably such a key element of your painting, we shouldn't neglect it. So let's have a closer look at the reference photograph and my painting and see if we can identify exactly what I'm talking about by blocking in. So I've zoomed in on my painting and I'll bring the reference up in the corner. So what am I looking at when I'm blocking in? Well, when I look at the reference, what I'm doing is I'm trying to sort of get a nice average colour. In other words, when I look at this area of snow on the reference photograph, I'm looking for the sort of the majority of colour there. In other words, there's a pale bluish colour there. I ignore all the detail, the little sort of shadows at the top, and the little sort of shadow line along the water there. I ignore all of that, and I'm looking at the colour underneath it all. A pale blue-grey colour. That's the colour which I think would form the basis of this area of my painting. And when I look around, I see that same blue-grey colour is scattered around throughout this whole area. It's the colour I've chosen to try and block in. Little variations, yes, and a little bit of light comes through here and there, but in the main, I've blocked in that blue colour because I think that locks in that area of my painting well. Same thing up in here. I look at the reference photograph, I see a darker blue-grey area. I ignore all those details because that's going to change things. I'm just looking at the colour that's underneath. It's a darker blue-grey colour, and that's what I've blocked in here. I can detail on top of it. And of course, the same here. It's not the detail I'm looking at, it's what's underneath it. It's the colour that's the basis for the painting that I'm looking for. And those are my best guesses at the values I needed to block in. Having got that done, I think my painting stands a much better chance of being a success. Now, the colours you need to block in. It's a building block for your painting. Sorry about the pun. I think the next part of my painting I should start working on is the thing that's most distant, which is that lovely burst of sunlight in the background. Now this will be the first maybe more than one layer of paint because I know from experience that I can put some bright colour on there, and once it dries, well, it's not quite as vibrant as I thought it was going to be. So I've got myself a small round brush and I'm going to take a little drop of white and some of my lovely golden colours that I used on the water here. So I just want to tint this. I don't want this to be like a giant white ball in the sky. Okay, so my initial colour is an off-white colour. And this is to kind of get the position of things. Now, in the reference photograph, it's really close to the edge there. Well, I'm going to sneak it in just a little bit more. Not much, just a little bit. And I'm going to put a little bit of a mark there. Now, again, try and imagine where your tree's going to go. So you've got a tree coming through here. More across an angle there, isn't it? So yeah, I think that's going to be about right. And again, I'm just going to dab this in. So let's get a little drop of that colour down in here. You can just about see it. And again, I'm just going to drop this in. Whoops. Now make sure you get it in the right place. You see, I've come a little bit offline there. Okay, let's put a little drop of that colour in down there. Let it sort of dry in for a little while and then come back and do it again. Okay, so that's my position and that's where it's going to be. Now, what about this misty swirl? I think we should have a go at getting that in. That looks like a fun process, doesn't it? And again, I'm going to use a fan brush for this. Corner of the fan brush, a drop of titanium white. There's a little bit of blue in there, but that's okay. And I'm using the corner of my fan brush. Okay, now this misty effect on here is actually quite a goldy orange colour. If it goes wrong, can I fix it? Probably. But sometimes you do have to sort of just have a little bit of a go at these things. Now, I'm just going to put a little bit of colour in with the corner of my fan brush. And smudge it with your finger. Try and get those lovely orangey colours going well. What do you think? Right colour? Wrong colour? Yeah, it's too yellow, isn't it? We need to be a little bit more to the orangey side of things. Okay, and let's try that again with a slightly more orangey colour. I think that's looking a little better. And yeah, I'm just going to get this kind of small amount of paint on here. You can have a second fan brush to blend it with. You could use a cotton bud. Yeah, look at that. 1, 2, 3. Looks like 3 ducks, doesn't it? Oh well. So I think it's time for the baby wipe. Now, I'm not going crazy with this. I'm not scraping this off. What I'm doing is I'm just removing some of the surplus colour. I'm just being very gentle with it. So I don't go right back down to the base colour. So I've kept a little of that colour on there. I haven't got rid of it completely. And it means I can have another go. I think I've got a better idea this time. So I left that baby wipe to dry off, and now my canvas is still just tacky. And I've switched to a 1-inch brush. And again, I think I'm just going to try using just the very corner of a 1-inch brush to do this. Now, I have literally put just a few tiny bits of paint on the corner of my brush. This is quite an old bristly brush here. And I'm going to go straight in. I'm just going to give it a little kind of swirl. I think this might be a little bit better. And again, I'm going to do this real gentle. Does it need any more? I don't think so. I think I've got that lovely smoke on the water effect that I'm looking for. And I might come back and adjust this a little bit more. Now, I want to intensify the brightness of the water here. I want to make this a little bit lighter. I could use a palette knife and work this in with a knife, but I quite like using a dagger brush for this. And again, this is a brush I'm sure if Bob had had a chance to use it, he would have used this a lot. But dagger brushes, they're like a soft palette knife. You can actually lay on the colour in little sort of bands. You can actually blend the colour in strips, so you can actually just work it into the painting really nicely. And as we work across, I'm going to start working into some of these slightly dark orangey colours here into the water. Again, just working in little bits of detail. Now, I want to work out what that little dark mass is there on the water. Have you figured it out yet? I just had a really good look at it. And they're not rocks, they're ducks. That's right. I thought that was just like a bit of rocky outcrop there, and then there's a few nice pebbles. But when you really have a good close look at it, you see they're little ducks. And so I'm going to just go back in and I'm going to use another one of these little flat brushes here, one of my little dagger brushes here. I'm going to go back in, I'm going to get some this lovely chocolatey brown colour, and I'm going to just drop those in. I think this is a sort of a lovely rich colour that I can use to paint a duck in silhouette. Black might be just too strong. I could put some Payne's grey with it as well, But again, I'm just looking to just get in a nice little suggestion, kind of work out where they all are. And they're just sort of sitting here in the water. These lovely little ducks. And I think some of them are feeding, some of them are sleeping. So a touch of Payne's grey. So some are sleeping, some are feeding, some are just visiting friends, relatives. But they're doing all sorts of duck type things, I guess. I'm back in with my little dagger brush here with something a little bit lighter. There we go. Remember, we're looking for the finished painting at this stage, where we're not looking to do a photographic painting here. And I think we have to be aware of that when we're painting sometimes, that you can get caught up in kind of extraneous detail, almost to the point of over painting things. And I rather like try and get a sort of sense for painting without actually sort of getting too sort of kind of bogged down in it, really. I think there's always a chance that we could just end up overdoing it, really. So let's put in a little bit of blue-grey colour around these little ducks. There we go. And if I catch a touch of brown, it'll make a little reflection. And again, a dagger brush, perfect for this little sort of detail on a painting. You can get in with just the very, very point. Just create these little shapes of ducks. There we are. Okay, let's start working on this foreground area here. I want to try and get some detail into here. Try and get some lovely vegetation coming through next. For this area in here in my painting, you see there's lots of little bits of detail in here, and I'm going to try and simplify things a little bit for this, because you can get bogged down in all this detail. I think kind of this is definitely an area where that can happen. So I had to tidy up on my palette. I pushed all my lavenders out of the way, and I want a sort of really deep grey colour here. So I'm going to take a little bit of Payne's grey. I don't want it to be totally grey. I'm going to have a little bit of cerulean blue colour into it, but I really want quite a deep grey colour here. And maybe a little touch of white off to the side. So just I've got a little variety of colours here. So darkest grey there, and a little bit of a different tone over here. And I'm going to apply this with a palette knife. I could use a brush to do it, but I think a knife would work better. I'm just going to get into some of this colour here. I'm just going to get a little bit on the edge of my knife. If you can hear a lot of rain outside, it's absolutely teeming down. Now, I'm going to try and stay fairly level here. Just put a little bit of colour on. And say, I'm just looking to work a little bit of detail into here. And I'm applying this very sparingly. I'm allowing the paint to sort of break up as it goes. Not quite so blue. And you see again, when I'm painting, I do a little bit, but I don't do a ton before I stop and assess the situation. I like to do just a little bit, and then come back and then make a little change. And again, I think that making changes quickly, or making changes sooner rather than later, is one of those little things that you get used to doing when you're painting a lot. You get good at knowing when to stop a little sooner. Again, that means maybe a little on the dark side. I'll just work these into the painting a little bit more. Again, you see I can get that kind of a nice sort of shadow effect going through there. A little bit, something a little bit lighter maybe. And now you've seen how I'm going to do that. I'm going to carry on adding these little swirls of colour across here, working in these little shadows with the edge of my knife until eventually I get down to this area where I'm going to start putting in some foliage. So a little bit of time lapse, I think. It's amazing how much detail you can do and add to a painting quickly using a palette. I never cease to be amazed. Now let's start working on this area over here. And there's lots of layers of vegetation here, all catching a little bit of light. So there's sort of, we have to sort of work in bands here. One of my old bristle brushes. I've given this one a wash and dried it thoroughly, but there's lots of sort of nice sticky up vegetation there, and it's sort of a purple black colour. I think I want, again, it's a lot of this is in shadow, so I'm using Payne's grey. I'm using some of that lovely deep blue colour that I just had in here, and I'm thinking about that little piece up there, and try and think about how you use your brush to actually sort of create a pattern. So, and if you're not sure, let's do something up here. Let's do something fun here. A little clean piece of palette there. Think about how you want this sort of short dead grass or maybe reeds, and practice on the edge of your palette here. Kind of create some nice looking shadowy vegetation. So kind of think about how you can use your brushes to make these sorts of marks. And it looks very similar, doesn't it, to what we did around the edge of those trees. But so you can create a clump of grasses here, short grass. Maybe you want to give it a little bit of a sparkle, put a little bit of, maybe a little touch of orange on there, as though the sunlight was catching it. And experiment with these sorts of ideas so that you can sort of find what works for you. Now, I'm going to be careful there because that's obviously going to go green, but you get the idea. You can play with colours, experiment, use a palette sometimes to actually have a little bit of a test run before you go at your painting. And again, I'm just going to press this into the painting. There's a little bit of a shadow under here as well, so I'm going to pull down a little hint of a shadow. That down. Okay, and then maybe another little suggestion here. I'm going to be sort of painting really kind of more by kind of instinct rather than by bringing such a slave to the reference. Again, I can't emphasize that enough, that I don't let my reference photograph ruin my enjoyment of a painting simply by being a slave to it. I always suggest trying to do something which works, which is fun, which looks right, as opposed to just being a slave to your reference. I got that little brush again, one of my little bristle brushes here. I just give it a bit of a wash now, very, very thorough dry clean. There we go. Maybe a little round brush here. I'm going to just put on just the suggestion of a little bit of sunlight on there, and I can give this a wipe quickly, and I can clean off any of the paint that might go green. So I'm just thinking about how the light would come across there and just catch. Yeah, there we go. See, just these little touches. And again, I'll do this with a little bit of time lapse, so you don't have to be sitting and watching me labouring over this endlessly. And again, just enjoy yourself, enjoy the process of adding this sort of detail to your paintings. Right, let's move on to this section. So you saw in that last little section there, just piling lots of lovely dark foliage into this corner here. Look what it did for my painting. It really sort of sends your eye off into the distance, doesn't it? This lovely, solid, dark, strong corner down here. And it really complements the rest of the sort of lovely, slightly soft, out of focus foliage in the background. And I know the colours aren't perfectly matched to the reference, but the same atmospheric look is kind of being generated. And this is an important sort of, again, when you're doing these sorts of techniques, that you look carefully and you check your colours and you underpaint and block things in with a lovely colour that matches. Do take time to match your underpainting colours, your blocking colours. And I know this is supposed to be snow, and I put a waterline in, and I don't really mind too much. This looks almost like it's frozen water, which is what it is, but I didn't want to go for the snowy effect on here. It would have been really fiddly to try and do and make it look good. Whereas I put in the waterline, I think this looks really nice as sort of frozen water. Now, I want to try and work on this tree next. I think I need to try and get that in and try and improve on my little sunshine. Remember, this is just a placeholder. For the tree, I'm going to use a liner brush, but I'm also going to use some low odor thinners here. And I'm going to actually thin down a little drop of my Payne's grey colour here. Again, I don't want a solid black colour. I think that's just too, it's too sort of strong almost. I want a sort of a greyish colour to it almost. And I could tint it with some dark sienna as well if I needed to. So I'm just like drying out a little bit. I could always put a little bit of, so I got a brown grey colour. It might be quite fun. Yeah, it's just a little bit of a tint there. There we go. I think it looks pretty good. And the reason why I'm using a little drop of odourless thinners here is because I actually want this to dry out quite quickly. In other words, if I used linseed oil, this whole tree is going to get very, very wet. And if I want to try and get a nice sort of softening effect in here, and I've got that oily paint running close beside it, like you see in the reference over there, I'm going to be a little bit in trouble. But by using odourless thinners, it's going to evaporate a little quicker. Now, let's have a little look at my reference here. And it kind of goes off the corner there a little bit. Again, it comes down through to around about there. I'm going to come down a little bit lower with my tree. I'm going to come through there. Okay, so that's going to be my tree. I moved my little sunshine over a little bit. So just drop that in. I think something like that. A little bit of a few little broken lines there. And again, I'm just going to drop this in, and I'm going to add some of this sort of foliage over the top again. But this is going to be one of those lovely sort of sticky, twiggy branches and trees that I want to actually go out close to that little piece of sunshine. But top tip for you here, folks, if you're going to be doing a little bit of a sort of a sort of ball of light effect here, kind of stop well short of it, okay, so that you don't start mixing mud. Give yourself a good sort of 1/4 of an inch all round. Right, let's spend a little bit of time adding these branches to my tree. I'll do it with my camera over there so you can actually see which way my hands are moving. So I didn't quite manage to get my painting done in one session. I left it overnight because I wanted these twigs and branches to dry so I could work on the sunshine. Now this has also just become really tacky, so I think I can add those final little details around the sun. Maybe even do a little bit more on the mist. And I've got my palette back, and I'm going to mix up a really lovely bright orange colour here, Indian yellow, a little touch of red, and again I might even just take a little touch of the dark sienna into the side of that, just to put a little bit of that colour through. I want it to be almost a little bit gingery orange coloured. There we go, just a little tiny bit of that orangey colour here. And this goes just to the outside of that bright area in my painting. I'll put a few little touches on here, see what it looks like. I think that's going to work. And so just going to increase the size of the little ball of light. I often find I get the best results with brushes which aren't in the best of shape. And let's see, I'm just going out wide enough just to sort of touch the edges of those little branches. Now, top tip here, this is likely to grow really big. If you're not careful, you can suddenly end up with a ball of light, you know, like something out of the sci-fi movies. So I'm going back in with white with just the tiniest hint of yellow into it. So this is a very, very bright colour. I'm going to start working in the centre here. Now this should really pop now it's going to be painted against that base colour, which was already quite bright. And again, just pull this out over the top. Now, my sunshine has grown a little too big, so I'm just using a cotton bud here just to kind of pull the edges back in again. Now, don't get frightened when you have to do these little adjustments. It's all part of the process of just learning to manipulate paint. So just using a cotton bud. What I'm doing is I'm just pushing the colour back into the centre again. Doesn't take a second to do. There we go. I shrunk my sun back down into a size which is more controllable. These things happen. Right. I'm just going to increase that ball of light. You can often sort of see these little bits of light attached to sort of things like branches and things. You look carefully. I'll bring the reference up. You often see that the twigs and branches actually do catch some of the light, and they sort of cast almost like a strange sort of shadow, like a little silhouette. And I'm just using little bits of that orange colour here and there, just kind of on the outer edges here, just a little touch of something. Again, small observations, but they may just make your painting jump a little bit more. There we are, just a few little sun rays kind of burning out from the centre there. Now, let's have a little play with this again. And I think with that, I'm not going to push my luck any further. And of course, I need to just brighten this up a little bit as well. I just think I need to add a little more detail to this corner here. There's a few nice long grasses that I can put in now that this little bit of water's done. And I think I'm going to add in a little touch of a nice purple colour I made up. I used some of my cerulean blue, a little touch of the alizarin crimson, made a nice little lavender colour here, quite dark, put a little bit of white with it maybe. And I just want to add the suggestion here and there, again, just to knock some of the blueness out of this. I think it's just a little bit kind of flat, but this just needs to be added in sort of randomly, just a little here and there, just down at the waterline. Again, this is an abstract colour, and you think, well, I can't really see that in the original sort of photograph, but you know, sometimes it's worth taking a chance on these little abstract colours. They can lift a dull corner, they can make something which is a little bit sort of sticky and solid. They can suddenly sort of add a little bit of extra fun to a painting. And it's quite amazing how often, when you look really closely at a painting, that you'll spot these little abstract colours that you think, well, they shouldn't really be there, but they seem to work okay. So there you have it, a lovely painting. Pay special attention to blocking in next time you do your painting. But don't move, there's some more lovely videos for you to watch coming right along. Happy blocking in, happy painting, people. I've got the sun right on the end of my nose.